Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Today's the Sabbath day. It's the 26th of November, and for those who haven't paid their property tax, you better get with it. My message today is titled The Four Horsemen of Revelation. We've had in this congregation three messages about the book of Revelation, and that's probably two more than what most other people hear in their entire lifetime. But we're going to go ahead and add this one to our list. When people hear the phrase the four horsemen of the apocalypse and see graphics of four different colored horses whose riders have a skull instead of a face, the phrase has come to be associated with death, terror, and destruction. Commonly, the same people seldom read the Bible, so they don't know that the subjects are mentioned in the last book of the New Testament, called the book of Revelation. People who do not read the Bible have reasons for why they do not read the book of Revelation. They say it's full of symbols and cannot be understood. For the same reason and others, sermons are not commonly preached on the book of Revelation. Now, the word apocalypse is a Greek word, and that Greek word is apocalypsis, and it means an uncovering, exposing, or revealing of something hidden. Accordingly, the last name of the book of the Bible is Revelation. The first paragraph of the book of Revelation identifies its source, the source of its inspired words, the revealer of the book, and the person who recorded the revelations. The quote that I'm going to give in a moment, excerpt, is sort of a montage from the Interlinear Bible, which is based upon the King James, the Restored Name Bibles, plural, the Sacred Scriptures, 1981, and the Scriptures, 1998 Bible. Revelation 1:1 essentially says, and I quote, "A revelation of Yeshua the Anointed, which Yahweh gave to him to show his servants the things which must shortly occur, and he sent and signified it through his messenger to his servant John, who testified of the word of Yahweh and the witness of Yeshua the Anointed to all he saw. Blessed is he that reads, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep the things which are written in it, for the time is near." The word servants here, of course, are Yahweh's people, the followers of Yeshua the Anointed, believers. But what's really intriguing about this paragraph, and which sometimes makes people uneasy, is the word I just read, shortly. That word is G5034. That's Greek, and it's the number in James Strong's exhaustive concordance and with dictionaries of the Hebrew and the Greek words of the original. That's the full title. Greek Dictionary of Strong's defines G5034 as a brief space of time. So the translators picked the word shortly amongst other definitions that meant something impending. Some of the events, though, described in the book of Revelation sound like they have already occurred, were occurring, and were about to occur within John's lifetime. Other events that were mentioned sound like they will occur within a reader's, our lifetime. A little background on the book of Revelation. Most New Testament sources mention that John was the youngest of the original 12 apostles and the last to die. Further, that John, with Paul, canonized the New Testament, or what we today call the New Testament Bible. John began writing the book of Revelation when he was exiled on the island of Patmos. Most everybody knows this. Patmos was a Greek-speaking Roman penal colony where political dissidents were put. It was not a criminal. It was not that type of a place. It was just send them over to Patmos. They can't get off. You don't have to lock them up. The island itself is their jail. And as it says in Revelation 1:9, John was exiled there because, quote, the word of Yahweh and the testimony of Yeshua, end quote. Well, these were the two political offenses why John was sent there. Well, you had a succession of Roman emperors which came and went along about this period of time. And for those who do Bible studies of this period, it's useful to identify the Roman emperor because the dates of their reigns are well known. The Romans documented things like that very exactly. Some advocate, though, that the completion of the book of Revelation occurred after John was released from Patmos and shortly before his death. Well, he went to live on a city in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, and he died there, it's pretty much agreed, in the year AD 67. Well, that means, since it was shortly before his death, that it was probably within 10 years or 5 years of his death. The book of Revelation may have been written during the sabbatical year of AD 62 to AD 63. Now that's kind of significant because sometimes you will see in Scripture words to the effect like Yahweh's day or the day of Yahweh. And these they should be examined in depth because they sometimes refer to a sabbatical year, and that's a good time reference. Well, toward the end of the first century and into the second, copyists were replicating the New Testament. And this is a slow and laborious process. And these copyists were not Jewish copyists. They were not scribes. Well, they copied the works of what we now call the New Testament in Koine Greek, in common Greek. And they did this. It was an ongoing enterprise and a necessity to replace those books from Paul and others that were being used and which were wearing out. Well, as about this period of time, recall that after in AD 70, the temple was destroyed, and so within, 20, 30, 40 years, the believers spread tremendously. And one of the areas that seen the greatest growth was that which Paul had spent a lot of his time, and that was in Asia Minor, in the area where John went and where he died. So when the demand for these documents, New Testament, grew and grew and grew and grew, there was no way that they could keep up with it. So they hired more copyists. But they also did something else. They started to use surrogate symbols for words. Today, if you see an original Greek scripture, you'll notice say a KT or something like that, and it'll have an overline instead of an underline, an overline. And that would stand for, say, Theos, which is translated into the New Testament as Elohim or Yahweh. A lot of times we and others get so used to using the word Elohim that we think it's an English word. Well, it isn't, of course. It's Hebrew. And you'll have authors who will make an excerpt out of the New Testament and the word Elohim will appear. That is incorrect. It is incorrect. You don't take a Greek word and translate it into a Hebrew word and then put it into an English Bible. It's just something that happens. Well, as they inserted these surrogates, it saved a lot of time because they were doing this for repetitive words, and that meant they did not have to spell the words out. So if you look in the Greek Greek dictionary or the concordance, you'll see some cases common words, lots of them, hundreds of them. So it meant that they would just put the symbol in there and would save the time of having to spell out all of these repetitive words. Well, the list of surrogate symbols grew to where I think there was about 30 of them or so. And that in itself is an interesting study. Well, only a few of these manuscripts, complete manuscripts, exist today. They bear names of the people who find them or procured them and so forth. There's only a handful. But when these handfuls were compared, they were found essentially no difference. Many more partial manuscripts and fragments, and they too had little or no divergence in the wording. Bottom line, we can be confident that what we have today is very close or not identical to that original work of the copyist. Well, there's some common misinformation about the book of Revelations. The 7 assemblies, called churches in most translations, they're commented upon in the book of Revelations, and they're named after the city where they were located. And they're mentioned in Revelation 2:1 for Ephesus, and 2:8 for Smyrna, 2:12 for Pergamon, 2:18 for Thyatira, Revelation 3:1 for Sardis, 3:7 for Philadelphia, and 3:14 for Laodicea. And these names of these assemblies, they're just not symbolic. They're not symbolic, as people are wont to assume. They were actual cities that existed before John wrote the book of Revelation. And sometimes people try to read into it and hence create symbolism in something where there never was symbolism. The critique of these 7 cities here was because of shortcomings that they had, except for the case of Philadelphia, which came out relatively unscathed. And everybody must remember that using these 7 cities as an example, the letters of Paul were circulated around between these various 7 churches. And the book of Revelation, which was by John, was also circulated around, which meant that these congregations got a critique about their own assembly. They got a critique. Well, surely the critique was useful for them to improve, but it is also important for us because we can look at the deficiencies which are called out in the book of John and see how they apply to us, if at all. Well, in Matthew 24:6, there were people who heard about wars and reports of wars. You frequently see that as wars and rumors of wars. but it's somewhat more correct as wars and reports of wars. And they think that the words describe events in the future that will mark Yeshua's impending return. Further, that these wars will be different from recent wars that they had experienced. It's important here to note something, that Paul and the apostles were preaching our Savior's imminent return up until the sabbatical year of AD 62 to 63. After that, it was not preached, because they came to understand that this was a relative term. It was applicable for at the time that it was written, but in the great overview, it means an indefinite time, but a time that is short. Yeshua himself said in Matthew 24:6, "See that you are not troubled, for these have to take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and reign against reign, and there shall be scarcities of food, and deadly diseases, and earthquakes in places, and all of these are the beginning of birth pains." These words clearly refer to tribulation. We must not forget that the Bible is essentially a history of the Israelite people. The Bible mentions various conflicts that have occurred over the centuries before John died. The Bible shows these conflicts were commonly on a tribal level. They were not conflicts that were regional in scope, and certainly not international in scope. But things have changed. Wars have occurred within modern-day Israel since its founding. Actually, before its founding. And there is the potential now for Israel, tiny little country, to be involved in a large international war. The Lamb and the Scroll. Revelation 4:1. I'm going to quote some of these things from the scriptures. Following the initial critique of the 7 assemblies, that's the churches, Revelation 4 describes the vision of a door through which John is invited in spirit. Now, this is Revelation 4:1, and he's invited. He sees this door, and he's invited to come through. He describes a beautiful room which contains a throne surrounded by 24 elders, and each of the elders has a white garment and a crown. There are also 7 lamps burning before the throne, and 4 living creatures, each of which has 6 wings. Each creature is described in terms of its face, like that of a lion, a calf, a man, and an eagle. They say continually, "Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh El Shaddai, who was and who is to come." The 24 elders shall fall down before him that sits on the throne, and shall worship him that lives forever and ever, and shall cast their crowns before the throne, saying, "You are worthy, our King and our Elohim, to receive the glory and honor and the power, for you did create all things, and because of you they were and are created." This is a very important paragraph here, because a lot of people are conjecturing, well, who is it that's sitting on the throne? The same person sitting on the throne is the one of whom it is said, "You did create all things, and because of your will they were and were created." Revelation 5:1. "And I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a scroll written on the back, sealed with 7 seals, within and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. No one in the room was worthy to take the scroll and open it. In the vision, John saw a lamb that was slain, and that lamb was worthy to take the scroll from the person sitting on the throne. Now the four horsemen of Revelation 6. Revelation 6, 1 through 8, mentions the sequential opening of the seven seals of the scroll. Now, they're only going to open up four at this point, but there were seven seals. And describe each of the four horsemen and the color of their horses as they appeared. The first rider is on a white horse, the second on a red horse, the third is on a black horse, and the fourth rider is on a pale horse. Well, each horseman denotes human suffering. White horse, the white horse. Revelation 6:2. The white horse carries a rider who, quote, had a bow and a crown was given him, and he went out conquering and to conquer, end quote. Some people have confused this image with the image of the rider on a white horse in Revelation 19. A comparison of the chapter 6 and 19 shows the two riders have little in common other than the color of the horse that they're on. Revelation 19. The rider of the white horse in chapter 6 is bent on conquest. The rider of the white horse in chapter 19 is to exact divine and just retribution for sin. He, quote, he who sat on him was called faithful and true, and in righteousness he judges and makes war against Satan, end of quote. In Revelation 19:13 and 16, this rider was called the Word of Yahweh, and King of Kings, and Master of Masters. And the rider on the white horse in Revelation 19 is clearly Yeshua the Anointed, coming to rule the world. We're blessed, incredibly blessed, because we know the names of the Father and the Son from the Hebrew. A lot of people think they do. They think that capital G-O-D is the name of the Father and capital J-E-S-U-S is the name of the Son. And that is as far as they go. Rarely, very rarely, you ever hear of a Bible study conducted by not the minister in charge, but by lay people, which says, well, today we're going to study Hebrew in depth here, and there's some things you probably aren't going to agree with, but I've got backup. You never hear that. Just never hear that. Why? Because they were taught in seminaries, capital G-O-D, capital J-E-S-U-S, and the seminarian professors were taught that, and the professors were taught that all the way up. And they pass it down the same way. Well, the writer in Revelation 6:2 represents those who claim it is they who can bring to humanity that which only Yeshua can bring. These impostors seek to conquer and destroy all who disagree with their religious beliefs and refuse to accept them. The history of the Roman Catholic Church and its inquisitions, especially those in France and especially in Spain, are but a few examples of this prophecy. It is absolutely disgusting what they did to innocent people. They were given the choice of being burned at the stake. And then at the last minute, a monk would whisper that if they would recant, they'd strangle them just before they lit the fires. it staggers the imagination of some of the inhumanity of one man to another that took place during these inquisitions. It's incredible. Yeshua warned about these people in Matthew 24, 2-5, saying, "Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am anointed, and shall deceive many." You'll commonly see in the scriptures words like, "I am Jesus," "I am he," and so forth and so on. The word that is there is Messiah. But again, as I said earlier, this is coming from the Greek, so the translator should not have inserted a Hebrew word. Messiah is a Hebrew word. Messiah means anointed. Therefore, the words, a more optimum translation is, "I am anointed." The impostor saying, "I'm anointed of heaven. Listen to me. Do what I say. Give me your money." Paul amplified Yeshua's word in 2 Corinthians 11, verses 3 and 4, and in 13 to 15. 2 Corinthians 11, 3-4. Quote, "But I fear, lest by any means, as the serpent deceived Eve by his lies, your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in the Anointed One. For if he that comes preaches another Yeshua, whom we did not proclaim, or if you receive a different spirit which we did not receive, or a different gospel which we did not accept, you might well endure these." Of course, unsaid is, you might not. 2 Corinthians 11, verses 13 to 15. Quote, "For such men are false prophets, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Yeshua, and no marvel, for even Satan transforms himself into an angel of light. It is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves as minister of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works." End quote. He's making it pretty clear, telling people just what is going to happen. Now, it's the listener's responsibility to have the wisdom to discern who is an imposter and who is not. Remember the admonition that there will come amongst you wolves in sheep's clothing? Paul is not warning against obvious false religions such as pagan animalism, Eastern cult sects, satanic worship, or bizarre semi-Christian cults, etc., which are easily recognized. He's warning against subtle, counterfeit religious leaders and their unscriptural teachings. And that's the key. The test of them is if they teach the inspired word, if they use the Bible to interpret the Bible, or do they teach man-made traditions as doctrine. Earlier I mentioned about asking people about whether they thought the Ten Commandments were binding on them. A number said, well, no, they're not, because we're bound by grace. And others said, when it came to questioning about worshiping on the Sabbath day, they said, well, we keep the Lord's Day. These are decisions by the clay. It's the potter that laid down the law, not the clay having an option of whether or not to obey it. There'll be a retribution for those who can't tell the difference. Well, if you compare the two white horsemen Revelation 6, 1 and 2 with Revelation 19 and 15. It shows that the first horseman is a counterfeit anointed one. It seems that it will be close enough to Yeshua so as to deceive the majority of people, but not the elect. And that's our goal. The horseman of Revelation 19 brandishes a sword out of his mouth, not a bow in his hand as in Revelation 6. The sword is symbolic for the inspired word in the Bible because it cuts both ways. In Hebrews 4:12, it is called a two-edged sword, like the Roman sword, which was two-edged, likely meaning that it cuts to the truth in either direction. And when Yeshua returns, he will reprove mankind with the inspired word. I didn't have to say that because it's obvious. It's patently obvious. Yet it is something that a lot of Sunday keepers just simply cannot connect to. The bow carried by the first horseman seems symbolic of the intimidation of mankind to follow his teachings, to force mankind to follow his teachings. You know, if we say, oh, well, gee, that couldn't happen. One only has to look at the history of Britain, England, the United Kingdom, all the same. You know, there were times when Protestantism was made the religion of the land, and then Catholicism, and then Protestantism back and forth, and the Pilgrims, they untied the rope and sailed for the New World because of all of that. We have reason to get on our knees and say a prayer of thanks every night to the Almighty Yahweh that we are here and we have the opportunity to choose. A lot of people don't have that opportunity. A lot of people didn't have that opportunity, and a lot of people died because of it. Revelation 6:4. Revelation 6:4 records what John saw as the second seal was opened. Now remember, he opened the first seal, and that was the white horse. Quote, and there went out another horse that was red, and the power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given to him a great sword. The color red is a translation of the Greek word in Strong's 4450. The definition is fire-like. That's the color. Color, fire, like fire. That is, parentheses, specifically, close parentheses, flame-colored, hyphen, rest. Red. Again, back to the problem that the translators have is they'll take this definition and they've got to make a decision about what color they should say the horse is. In some Bibles, you will see flame red. As good a definition as any based on what we read here. Red, much more simpler. America's been involved in World War I and World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, a war in Grenada, Afghanistan, and Iraq twice, and Kuwait, and currently in Syria. Wars and rumors of wars. Well, it's a continual occurrence throughout history, not just Israelite history, throughout history. Many lives have been lost, many people have been maimed, much blood has been spilled, much treasure has been lost because of war. But since World War II, the number of countries possessing nuclear weapon grade material has greatly increased. Some of these countries have unstable leaders who might unleash nuclear weapons clandestinely against another country which also has them. That country might not know who to retaliate against and could attack innocent countries. They might have nuclear weapons, and therefore they might launch a retaliatory strike against who they think dropped the weapon on them. But they could be wrong too. Old enemies, large countries that have nuclear arsenals without second strike capability become a deterrent to making a first strike. Because if who they attack knows who attacked them, they will launch their missiles and bombs and so forth. And so in the end, you've got two countries perhaps decimated. Who's the victor? But if the first country launches the weapons, or drops the weapons or whatever, and the second country retaliates, the first country very likely does not have second strike capability. And that's very important. But when countries have large arsenals, they would not logically be so deterred. This did happen in history. Here a while back, I'm sure you can remember the initials, SALT. It stands for Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, SALT. The Russians signed it for one reason only. The generals told the head person, we don't have second strike capability. Only America does. Reading on the wall is, if we strike first, we're naked. They will wipe us off the map. They'll suffer, but they will wipe us off the map. So they sign the Strategic Arms Limitation, or the SALT agreement. Well, time has passed. And guess what? Russia did not, and has refused to renew the SALT treaty. And the reason is because enough time has gone by to where they have developed second strike capability. It's scary. Clearly, Matthew 24:22 applies. And except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh saved. The annihilation of all mankind is the probable outcome of global nuclear war, immediately or later by radiation, unless divine intervention occurs. That's our hope, that divine intervention will occur. Because you have unstable people right now who have nuclear weapons, and even though they do not have second strike capability, they don't care. All they've got in mind is, we're going to do it, we're going to get even, we're going to fix them, without a thought that their families are not going to be anything other than ashes. The black horse is symbolic of famine. Revelation 6:5-6 records what John saw and heard. Quote, and when I had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, come and see. And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, a measure for a denarius, and three of wheat for a denarius, and 3 measures of barley for a denarius. And see that you do not hurt the oil and the wine. Oil and wine were staples. People used them every day. A denarius was equal to, at that time, about a day's wages for a man. So here a man would be working an equivalent all day long for a relatively small quantity of a grain. Now, if he chose lesser quality barley, he might get 3 times that amount, but it was small. It's a small amount. And that's the point that's being made here, is that you might have a denarius and you might buy a grain with it. And when you consume the grain and you don't have a denarius, you're going to starve. Famine. Well, famine follows rapidly behind war. Starvation and scarcity are the natural and immediate results of crop damage, contaminated water supplies, destroyed livestock, and the unusually high food demands for sustenance to feed a standing army. One can go back and read things in history not too far from here when Sherman burned a path across Atlanta, 25 miles wide. Nothing was left. Nothing. Nothing. It happens. It has happened. And it will happen. War affects the distribution of food to those who need it, even when there is a ceasefire agreement and modern transportation. We see that right now. You have various groups who are trying to bring food in by truck to certain areas. The suffering is terrible, and you've got little local no-goodness idiots who want to be paid a bribe to let the food truck convoy through, and they want to take off sacks of flour and whatnot as payment. And so it's happening right now. The same problem happens with medical supplies and fuel supplies. You got to bribe them in order to, if you're a philanthropic organization and you're trying to feed people, you got to bribe these people in order for you to give the food away at the destination of the trucks. Some areas in South Africa have been denuded of trees and bushes for miles around the refugee camp. The area is being denuded. The amount grows by hundreds of acres a day. There are reports of little kids who have been walking for 2 days, and they got a little small bundle of sticks on their back, walking for 2 days for a little bundle of sticks. That's how far they had to go to get fuel for their sustenance. The goat. The goat is reputed to be the most destructive animal on earth. It destroys any stubble left by cattle because the goat grasps the stubble and shakes its head, and it pulls the grass out by the roots. Nothing grows back. Whereas cattle bite the sprout, the roots stay there and it'll come up again. And what do you see in most places in the Mideast where there's nothing but dust and dry and so forth? An obvious lack of trees. Look at the cities, for example, that you'll see on the news. Very few trees, very few bushes, because of the goat. There will be periodic famines, plural, in the future, but in a global war, famine will be worldwide. In other words, there won't be some philanthropic group getting food and loading them into trucks and sending them somewhere. They're going to be eating it themselves. There's not going to be food transported anywhere. It's going to be consumed at the point that it's available. The pale horse. The pale horse is symbolic of pestilence and disease. Revelation 6, 7, and 8. Again, John records what he saw and heard. Quote, "And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, 'Come and see.' And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And the name of him that sat upon was Death, and the grave followed after him." In most Bibles, you'll commonly see the word hell instead of grave. Grave is the more correct definition here, the more correct word. "And power was given unto them over a fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth." Well, I think the first two hazards are pretty clear. It's the last one that throws a lot of people. If they have visions of lions and so forth coming out of the woods and devouring people, it's not what's meant here. That surely will occur in some places because people will be weak from lack of food. The animals will be hungry, and they will engage in activities that normally the fear of man would prevent them from doing. But the word pale here gives a clue as to the type of beasts. The word pale is translated from the Greek word chloros, spelled C-H-L-O-R-O-S. It's the same root word from which the term chlorophyll comes from. It's the substance that helps make leafy plants green. In biblical usage, a pale green, sickly, yellowish green color is the color of disease. Yeshua the Revelator interprets the meaning of this pale green horse in Matthew 24:7. "And there shall be pestilences," plural, disease epidemics that are of rural scope, and they shall occur, and the term for them is pandemics. So if you hear a pandemic somewhere, it's a very large and serious problem. Well, disease epidemics follow closely behind a famine. Millions who might survive an initial nuclear attack will surely die in the famine that follows. Revelation 6:8 mentions that the pale horse would bring death to 1/4 of all mankind. That's more than 2 billion human beings. Billion. The word pest comes from the word pestilence and includes animal-borne disease such as ticks, and from the fleas of a rat which caused the bubonic plague, the Black Death. So these beasts, they're not necessarily big as an elephant. They can be quite small. But they kill you just the same way. Below that exist things that can kill you. Viruses, bacteria. Even larger than that is amoebas. People have just recently been reported where they went swimming in a freshwater lake and it got amoeba in the ear, which went through to the brain. So we should get down on our knees and give thanks that we're not smited off the earth for all of the bad things that we do. Because there are many, many avenues that death could come to us by. many viruses. You can watch some of these shows on TV where in some South American countries you can get 5 diseases at the same time. Malaria, sleeping sickness, some sort of a thing that burrows under the skin, a thing in the blood system that goes to the thalamus in the brain. We ought to get on our knees and thank the Almighty that we woke up this morning. We have another day of life, that He didn't smite us off the earth yesterday. Well, about the bubonic plague, by some accounts, it eliminated 1/4 of all of the people in Europe. It was spread by a little small black rat. Well, in a short period of time, the black rat wasn't seen. But what was seen was a large brown rat called the Norwegian rat. I don't know if the large brown rat did a job on the small black rat, but the fact of the matter is when the black rats were gone, ticks, fleas were gone, and the plague was over. Yet, we have in this country, each year, we have a report of about 20 to 50 cases of bubonic plague. It's still here. If the Almighty chose to, could make it happen, just like that. There's innumerable ways, asteroids coming down and hitting in the middle of the city, destroying everything for 100 miles direction. There's just so many ways that if our Creator was vengeful, us little pieces of clay wouldn't have a chance. We wouldn't last a nanosecond. Well, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, well, what about the other diseases? You didn't mention those. Cholera, smallpox. There are still cases of cholera being reported. Fortunately, here in the United States, we only have a small percentage of these things that are happening compared to undeveloped countries. It's not unusual, even in countries where they take great efforts to keep these things under control, get 350 cases a year of bubonic plague. About 200 cases of cholera. So it's here. It's just being held in check by the blessings of the Almighty. Well, I'm sure everybody remembers the recent Ebola outbreak. Now, that was a warning to mankind of just how quickly disease can be spread worldwide and you have a pandemic. You can have one plane load of folks with one infected person, and if everybody in the plane gets infected for the duration of the flight, when the plane lands, the effects are tremendous, because some of those people will transfer to another flight and continue on, and that plane load can become infected. And you can just imagine how the thing can grow, the problem can grow geometrically. In conclusion, we've been warned about the dangers of mankind. If mankind continues along the downward spiral he's going. So believers must persevere in obedience to Yahweh's word until we die, or until the end of the age, whichever comes first. Thank you.